and Brian Reisinger. Welcome to the Adult in the Room podcast. How are you?
Oh, I'm so good. Thanks for having me. I appreciate you shedding light on all these issues.
Lots of stuff going on. I really appreciate the fact that you wrote this really meaningful story where it's beyond the trope of blood, sweat, and tears, but in farming, as your family has learned, that is a reality every single day. Tell me about your book, how it came about, and just give us some little background on that, and we'll start launching into some more specific questions.
Absolutely. That sounds great. I appreciate that question so much because so often we talk about these issues and things affecting our farms and our food, and we forget about the people along the way. And that's really where
Hmm.
this began. I grew up working with my dad the time I could walk, and I remember being out there in the farmyard with him, hearing a truck come in, gravel popping under the tires, and there was a driver coming up, whether it's a local farmer or a seed salesman, whatever, saying to my dad, "Hey, this farm went under, that
Uh,
farm sold," and we're just living with that. So even as a little kid,
mm,
yeah, and I knew it was a way of life disappearing that was special. I didn't know why it was disappearing. And it turns out that most people in this country don't either. But that's what I discovered as I pursued my writing craft. The farm is it need to be investigated. So what I did with Language Cash Poor is we said, let's answer that question. And I dove in telling our family story from the Great Depression on up through today's stories of survival through farmland accidents and weather that blesses or threatens
yeah.
economic upheaval. And then I investigated what are the hidden areas of history driving this disappearance? Why are our farms disappearing like they have? The economic, political, and technological reasons for the past century. What I found is we've been losing farms at the rate of 45,000 a year for the past century. We've never got
Wow.
why.
Why? Yeah. Could you tell us some of the reasons why?
I can. I love that first image. I just want to say about
That's from
the
your Twitter feed or your X feed.
Culver's, which is a Wisconsin-based restaurant. They have a big campaign where they try to buy food from farmers, local farmers, and they try to support our farmers. We need more of our economy doing that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
Here's why our farms are disappearing. There's three big categories. One is economic crises that have occurred in this country. We didn't know how they were affecting the farm, whether it was the Great Depression, farm crisis, the 1980s, COVID. Every time something happens and we don't have a handle on, okay, we know we went through the depression. We know we just had the Great Recession. What happened to our farms? We don't know. The second
Hmm.
reason is political decisions. Both parties over time, the establishment of the Republican Party as well as the Democrats, different points in history,
Sure.
everybody made these mistakes, right? And then the third, in addition to those government policies making those economic catastrophes worse, is technological. And we've had technology really move farms forward. But also, our technology has left so many family farms behind. We've lost track of making sure that our machinery and our different equipment is something that farms of all sizes and types can access.
Huh.
Got competitive farms that are perfectly resourceful, perfectly efficient, but they can't adopt the new technology that only works in a great big facility or a huge row
Well,
planter, that kind
whose
of thing.
fault is that? Is that the manufacturers for building them too large? Can they scale them down for a family farm, or are they just prohibitively expensive?
It's such a good question. And the honest answer is it's kind of all of our fault. And what I mean by that is in the second half of the 20th century, we had all this research out there. So it wasn't just manufacturers or it was government, it was universities, it was everybody. And they were saying, hey, farm wages are way lower than manufacturing wages. We got to do something about that. That's a problem
Mm.
because we're losing and we talk about this in the chapter, our family had mass migration, just like everybody else did from rural areas to urban areas to chase those factory wages. So for a while, we needed technology. Researchers at universities and government and at private companies were right to say, okay, what can we do to farm more acres and have more animals with fewer people breaking their backs to do it? That's why not everyone in this country has to grow their own food. So to a point, that was good. But we
Hmm.
lost track of the fact that went so far that we have all kinds of farms that are medium and small size farms where they're competitive. They can produce the food that we need, but the technology doesn't work on their farm anymore. It's either too big to be adopted or it's too expensive. And so only the
Mm.
biggest operations can do it. So even if we weren't screwing up these economic crises, and even if we didn't have government screwing things up, we'd still have technology that was naturally leaving people behind. What we needed was to have a conversation like this to say to the private sector and government and
Mm.
universities, hey guys, we're losing sight of what our farms need to be able to continue to innovate and compete globally.
It sounds like somebody needs to get into the rental business for farm equipment, this satellite, driven. What I mean is that the farmers that I've seen, they have their combines and all their other things that are they're connected. They're connected to satellite, and And even your local pumpkin patch that has a corn maze has a satellite connection where they can make the corn maze or something. I mean, so it is a big thing. It's surprising to me that so few people have that capability.
Yeah.
Is that Am I
It's
right?
so
Or
You're absolutely right, and also the new technology that's coming doesn't even cater. So if we need a model of some kind that breaks that barrier that you're talking about, but we also need the new technology coming up to actually cater to farms of different sizes. I'll give you a perfect
Mhm.
example, AI. AI freaks people out in a lot of different ways. I understand there's a big fight and debate over AI and jobs, and
Sure,
I gotta have that discussion. As it pertains to farming and AI, which is something that people aren't talking about, but has the same problems tied to it, we could have you could imagine a world where AI means just one great big NASA style bank of computer screens and just one person running a million acre farm for one guy.
sure,
Or you can imagine a world where AI creates all kinds of small modular vehicles where the small farmer can have a small AI operated vehicle to tend to their fields, and the bigger farmer can have more of those modules. So it scales up and scales down. We don't design stuff like that anymore. We just design it as big as we can. And
sure.
that's the problem for our farms too.
Can I ask you? I One of the things that has always puzzled me, or maybe it shouldn't puzzle me, because don't think government is pretty much ever the answer. I'm so, but I I I wonder how the markets and how the farming products or the farming business itself are distorted by government subsidies. And
Yeah.
I say that as a warning because I've seen, and I think we've all seen, what government subsidies have done to, for example, the price of college, the price of student loans. Every time the government gets involved, there is a distortion in the market. And I have to believe that is something that has occurred in the farming industry.
Yeah.
Dispel that notion or at least affirm it.
No,
How is that happening?
you're right, and it gets messy very quick. And
Yeah.
so what I would say is, the way I look at it, and like, there's a lot of farm country people in farm country who agree with you. Even if they have had no choice in their mind but to access one program or another because they're trying to, they're just dealing with their own reality. Whether they've done that or not, a lot of people agree. And I always kind of think about it this way. I think government can't fix the issue, but they can sure contribute to screwing it up. And as we've had for a very long time. So here's what's going on. For a century now, since basically the Great Depression, when the government kind of waged this big, huge intervention in farming, we've had program after program pile up, and we've never really reformed them in a deep way and dealt with that. And so what happens is we got a bunch of programs that aren't working anymore the way they were supposed to if they ever were. We got a bunch of programs that are contradictory, honestly, because we keep piling them on. And then we got other programs that become prone to favoritism and abuse, which I think is part of what you're talking about too, because that happens to government over time.
I
And
suppose, yeah.
so we've got all these programs, and that's why it's
Human
possible.
nature is what it is, right?
That's right. And government mechanizes that, right? Puts it on overdrive. So now we have taxpayers, hardworking taxpayers, who are correctly asking, where's my money going to? And then you
Mm,
got family farmers who are saying, where's all that support that was supposed to be coming? It's wasted in some cases. In some cases, we've got certain types of companies or corporate structures taking advantage of it. You got non-farmers taking advantage of it, all kinds of things that keep that money from getting to where it's supposed to get. So whether you agree with one program in the first place kind of is irrelevant at this point because they aren't functioning right. We need a moonshot to basically redraw government policy around farming in this country.
when did it start to go wrong?
That's a great question. It probably was in the biggest way was probably in the years after the Depression. Because what happened in the Depression, we had farms getting wiped out at the same time that people were starving. And so it was like this conundrum. We need these farms surviving, and how do we
Yeah,
feed people? So, I'm just going to, for sake of argument, let's set aside the Great Depression, whether they did the right thing or not. There were people that argue we got to do this for emergency purposes, right? Okay. Some people might buy that, some people may not buy that. Fine. But those emergency actions continued after the Depression. They continued on in through the rest of the 20th century. So whether that program was effective in that crisis or not, it just continues. The government spending continued to go through the roof, and it got bigger and bigger. And the folks that are able to take advantage of that are who? When government's picking winners and losers, it's the people who can tilt the scale in their favor that win.
absolutely. Big
So
boys always win.
that's right. So you got big folks coming in. They've got the lobbyists to shape the policies in the first place. Then they got the lawyers and the tax accountants to take advantage of it. So government built this thing up, whether everything that was done should have been done during that emergency of the Great Depression or not. We could debate each program, but the big thing is that it continued after that. And it's been something that people have been able to take advantage of to some degree ever since.
Hmm. Yeah. Do you think fewer subsidies would be a balm for the farming industry? Where, I don't know,
Yeah.
farmers would probably disagree with me, but
Well, it's
just
it's
curious.
such a good question because it's kind of like having that tiger by the tail. You don't
Yeah.
exactly want to be holding on to that tiger's tail, but you're afraid if you let him go, he's going to turn around and bite. That's what the situation that
Hmm.
farmers are in. They may not want to be involved in these subsidies anymore, but they may have a business model that
Sure.
depends on it because their grandpa or their dad did it that way. And it's like, well, how am I going to do this without that certain amount of revenue from my soybean crop? And
Right.
they want to do new things and they can get there, but they need help. And so less subsidies is maybe part of the answer long term, but to your right, you'd have farmers saying, some of them saying good riddance, and some of them saying, hey, I agree, but I've got a business built around this through no fault of my own. So what we need to do is diversify the subsidies, first of all. Quit picking winners and losers. It's crazy. You've got some crops that like sugar that have a whole bunch of subsidies around them.
Yeah.
And people like who grow like fruits and vegetables, like asparagus farmers in Michigan to the east of where I grew up, they get not even basic crop insurance. Crop insurance is when the farmer pays in and the government pays in a little bit, and if the price goes down
Hmm.
below, they get a payout. You can argue whether you like the government part of that or not, but the program, the insurance part makes sense. And asparagus farmers don't get any of that. And meantime, sugar's got all kinds. And then
Yeah.
look at our food system, right?
Yeah.
So could we make something work with fewer subsidies? We probably could over the long term. In the meantime, we got businesses that are depending on it and others that are being completely treated unfairly. I think if we
Like
divert
what? I mean, besides asparagus, what else do you see here?
honestly, most fruits and vegetables, which is incredible.
Why
Most fruits
is
and
that?
vegetables,
I
you
mean,
know,
because we import so many of them or what have you?
it's partially that, and it also has to do with what we were talking about favoritism and abuse. The industries that have had the money to pay the lobbyists to lean the
Mm.
government policy in a particular direction have been able to do that. And it's built up and it's compounded over time. And eventually you get so many poker chips on one side of the table and nobody's got any over here. So it's just an imbalance that's built up over time.
Sure. It's a
If
distortion.
It is a distortion. So if we can quit picking winners and losers partially by just kind of like diversifying a little and making sure if there is something that has to be there to help with like uncontrollable weather,
Yeah.
let's have all farmers be able to qualify for that. But then let's quit picking winners and losers from there.
It must be an interesting time for you to observe. Your family has a farm. You're not actively farming, although I understand that you get in you're on the machinery and you're helping out as much as you can. You're an author and uh, and so, but it must be a very interesting time because now we see in the Trump administration, in addition to the tariff situation and sort of busting down the door to Europe for a lot of American products, that must be very exciting for some people. And the other thing is that we're looking at more regenerative farmers and that kind of a thing. So you're looking for smaller, more local sourcing for your food.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. You're right. It is a fascinating time. And for those folks who haven't seen the backstory, as you mentioned, I tell our story, and they throw me in a tractor now and then I help on the business side. But my sister's the one that had the talent for cattle and crops that I didn't. So she's
Nice.
working to take it over from my dad. My dad's still farming. My sister's working to take it over. And I help where I can. And part of that is trying to find solutions. So it's an interesting time. It's always a little bit of a scary time for farms because they've been living at the edge for so long. And so I'm
Mhm.
really excited of a lot of things that are happening and a
Mhm.
lot of them try to take advantage of. I also was raised by people who survived the depression and the farm crisis, and we're taught to always be afraid because you got to kind of just like always have that drive.
There's nothing wrong with that. Me too. My parents were brought up in those times. My grandmother and grandfather, and then had a farm, and then
Yep.
my mom and dad grew out of that. I mean, we ate K rations as children. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? We was just
Yeah.
that's everything from the Army Navy store. That was just how we lived because we were always living on the edge, and
Yeah.
so I'm used to that kind of
Yeah.
stuff.
Our families would very much relate, probably feel like we were reading each other's mail. And so but to get to your point of your question on the excitement, if we have a world where we're going out there and we're driving harder bargains with trade partners. We can break out of this situation we've had with ever since the 90s. It's been, hey, you got to have free trade, freewheeling, whether it's
Mhm.
fair to farmers and American workers or not, or they get
Right.
ripped off. It doesn't matter. We just need more markets, more markets. On the other hand, you can't totally shut down trade 100% because farmers want to sell more domestically, but some of them have types of crops and products that the excess has to be sold abroad. So farmers are stuck in the middle. But if we have these trade deals where they're driving harder bargains, and we're getting trade deals with the UK and Japan and Indonesia, and there's been progress with various parts of the EU. And you hear about all this stuff going. There's been ongoing debates with India. If we can land trade deals after tougher negotiations like we've been having, we can have trade deals that put family farms first. And that's actually what we need. Farmers have been getting screwed by unfair trade standards that pushed prices down for decades. And they
Mm.
also need more markets. And so having tougher trade deals that put family farms first is something that I think we're at a point in our history or whatever people think of politics, we should want to land more trade deals that are tougher negotiated. So that can be a very exciting thing. And
Mhm.
on the issue of regenerative farming, more people than ever care about where their food comes from.
Mm.
And that's such an exciting thing. We need to make sure that we make that transition in a way that small businesses that have very little money and very little time to waste, very little room for error, can make the changes toward new crops that people want their food coming from. But people caring more than ever where their food comes from, and regenerative ag and other practices is a chance for us to take farms that have been stuck growing certain types of crops and products in broken markets and moving them into new entrepreneurial opportunities. So we got to do it the right way, but if we do, it can be very exciting.
I mean, you have to be a talented person and an artful person in order to do that, in addition to being a good business person. But, well, my family, my mom's side of the family grew up in Sweden and on a family farm, which is still in the family.
Uh,
And we were able to go several years ago, but what was a real eye opener was the fact that my cousin was a dairy farmer, a crop farmer. I can't remember what he was growing at the time. He was a forester. What else did he do? He dairy. Did I say dairy farm? And then he also grew steers for meat. And so, I mean, he had to do everything.
yeah.
And one of the things I found fascinating was he's up in like Nowheresville, beautiful country, unbelievably beautiful country. Probably looks a lot like Wisconsin actually in Sweden. That's why so many Swedes and Germans and all those guys decided to settle there. But what was interesting was from Stockholm, they'd send him, because it's hard to find people to work the land. He couldn't do it all himself, and his kids were grown, and they were going. They were at that time. Well, actually, when I was there, they were young, but they're really too much too young to really help much. And they'd send him farmhands who were on a drug rehab program. So he'd get these heroin addicts from Stockholm and he'd have to make men of them. I mean,
Wow.
it's just, I mean, it's kind of interesting. Talk a little bit about what you think of that. And the other thing is, what you've got, I found some pictures on your timeline of your X post, and you've got some people working in the fields. And how hard is it to find workers now? I mean, obviously, this whole immigration crackdown and that sort of thing. But Trump's actually softening on that. He knows farmers need workers. So, what are you thinking?
Yeah, it's fascinating to hear that program. And I got to say, I admire your relative for doing that on
Yeah.
top of all the types of farming he's doing. And even if he's only doing one type of farming, I always say every farmer, people like my dad and sister, they're not just farmer, they're also a plumber, electrician, a
Oh yeah,
carpenter. But
absolutely.
so rehabilitating people from drug programs is a whole nother level. On the other, if you're going to have someone figure out a way to straighten out their life and get going in the right direction, there's maybe no place better than a farm, where you learn the circle of life and you learn the value of work, and you really have a chance to grow as a person, I think, while you're growing food. But on the labor issue, you're so right. It's a fraught time right now, and farmers are. This is another one where farmers are caught a little bit in some political crosswinds. I'll explain what I mean. Farmers from rural America, a lot of small towns and communities, very big supporters of President Trump. And
Yeah.
for a number of them, one of the reasons they might have done that is because they agreed with securing the border. So whether people like that or not, that's a huge source of
Well,
President
you
Trump's
don't want a
support.
pedophile working on your farm, okay? You just want to
Yeah,
make sure you get those bad dudes out, right? So
that's right. Well,
get the good people back in, you
there's
know.
been raids where some of that stuff is found, and farmers are living that world. And then on the other hand, they're also living the world where about half of our farm labor comes from immigrants right now. And so that's a challenging situation because farmers, many of them, I don't want to speak for all, many farmers want to secure the border and would be supportive of policies, but also would say, hey, we got to figure out a way to have a workforce here that's legal. And some of that comes from immigration. So
Sure.
there's ways to do that. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. And what I always say to people is, look, if we want to secure the border, which for a long time was a bipartisan goal in this country, if we want to secure the border, secure legal workforce, what we need to do is crack down on the cartels that are not only trafficking drugs, but they're trafficking people. And they make it so that it is difficult sometimes for employers to know if someone is here with a legal status or not a legal status.
Hmm.
And also, we got to do that while securing a legal workforce with like farm visa programs and things like that. You can do that.
We've done
But
it.
that's right. That's right. Yeah, but we got to get serious about solving the public policy issue, which is the challenge with Washington. There's one other thing that can help that actually, I don't want to say it sidesteps the farm debate, but it's sort of like bigger than
Okay.
the immigration farm debate, which is if we stop having our farms relentlessly pushed toward get big or get out. That's what we've been doing to farms. That's why they've been disappearing. What that means is get big or
Mhm.
get out forces farms to get bigger and bigger and have cheaper and cheaper labor. So if we move away from bigger and bigger farms and cheaper labor toward more of our farms of all sizes able to be growing entrepreneurial ventures again, those can be growing small businesses with rising wages. So let's go from forcing farms to get bigger and have cheaper labor to having more farms able to have a way to make it and have rising wages for all.
How do
That's
you do
something.
that? What are
Well,
the economic pressures that have to occur in order to make that
totally.
sustainable?
One of them is we got to fix the technology issue you and I were talking about before. We got to have American innovation reaching farms of all types and sizes. If you're competitive, if you're resourceful, you can utilize this technology. You don't have to be a certain size. We got to do that. We got to make sure that government makes sure that we have fair markets. What I mean by that is part of that is international trade, what we just talked about,
Yeah.
fair trade deals and make sure it's not imbalanced, but also markets that make sure that the biggest players in our economy of any industry aren't able to be anti-competitive, monopoly type stuff. We got to make sure that we're not allowing that. And then we have to really capitalize on the fact that more people than ever care about where their food comes from, meaning those people need to buy more food from farmers markets, local farmers down the road,
Yeah.
online marketplaces where they can get access to farmers, grocery stores that'll carry goods from local farmers because many will if they know people will buy it. More consumers, you don't have to buy it. You can't necessarily get every single food from a local farmer, but you can
Sure.
do a lot more of it. And we can all if every consumer takes another step in that direction and farmers have more things that they can grow and have a new entrepreneur opportunity in, that can make a big difference. So we got to kind of do all those things at once. And
Sure.
that's the hard part. That's why we have
We
to
can
inspire.
we can do that.
Yeah.
It'll take organization and that sort of thing. You brought up cartels, and I'm so glad you did because it reminded me of something. Um, so the cartels are taking over people's families' farms south of the border in Central America, and they get the farmers get no choice in the matter. The cartels come in, they say you can go with us or you can die, and that's pretty much the choice you have. We'll let you stay, and we'll let you work on your own farm, and then otherwise, that's it. Those are your choices. And my understanding, and tell me if I'm wrong, the cartels run almost all of the avocado industry. And I've, I mean, I feel like here we are back at the blood diamond kind of a situation. Why do I want to buy blood avocados? But I know at the end of that, or the very beginning of that trail of food to people, there's a farmer. And that guy just got blown off his land by these cartel people.
Yeah. I don't know the statistics around the avocado industry specifically. However, the forces you're talking about are very real. The cartels are very real. And there's also other threats that are really bad, like the screwworm that is infecting beef in Mexico and coming north. And
Yeah.
then just all these other countries that, there are all kinds of foreign countries, let's say Chinese, Communist Party,
Yes.
China, communist China.
Trying to do stuff.
Yeah, that don't have the same labor standards, don't have the same wage standards, all these things that make it easier to produce something way cheaper than America because they aren't producing it, humanely for among many other issues.
Well, and
So
plus they're trying to sabotage our crops too.
that's
They're
right.
sending people in with noxious weeds on purpose.
Yep, yep,
Yeah,
and buying up farmland and cheating on their currency and all kinds of right? And so
right.
the big solution to this is to have a world where we go from importing anything we possibly can from anywhere to having a strong domestic market that we supply here, our own domestic food supply that
We
is
can do
raw,
it.
that we
We
can
can do
do,
this.
and then sell our excess abroad. Right now, we've kind of got it backwards. This is something that shocks people. So we've been losing
Yes.
farms at the rate of 45,000 a year for the past century. And at the same time, we are importing more and more food than we ever had. Now, I'm going to use a number that existed near the end of the Biden administration, beginning of Trump administration, because it's the fairest thing I can do to just sort of separate politics.
Mhm.
So, and when we're in that time frame, you can talk about who's at blame for one thing or another. It doesn't really matter. We're at $42.5 billion agricultural trade deficit, meaning we were importing $42.5 billion more in food than we were exporting. So, put those things together. We are wiping out our domestic food supply by killing our family farms
Mm.
while at the same time importing more and more food than ever, depending on foreign countries. It sounds like the plot to like a doomsday movie. You know what I mean? Like an Armageddon type movie. Why would a country do that?
Why
That's what we're
would a
doing.
country do that?
So we got to flip that around. We got to do things that we've been talking about here to get family farms able to make it by growing food for Americans and then let them sell the excess abroad and trade where we need to around those margins.
Sure.
That's what we need to do. Right now, we get it the other way around. We're wiping out our farms and we're importing the food. Now, maybe that doesn't solve the avocado cartel issue, but it means that we have more types of food grown in America that can be used instead of a avocado. And maybe the avocados that we do buy in that changed world can be more humanely grown. But right now, we're just taking whatever comes from the rest of the globe, however it was produced.
I mean, don't you think that, I mean, the fact that farmers were able to adapt and succeed through all of these different times where we had different motivations and economic pressures and distortions and all that stuff. I mean, it makes people understand and realize and appreciate the fact that people are flexible. But the fact of the matter is, it always redounds to the small guy who's able to do what he can and do the best he can or she can with the land they have. And in order to do that, they have to take really good care of it. And that's why, we see that this whole idea of the regenerative farming coming back. Some people call it just regular farming. I look at it and I say to myself, when I hear about regenerative farming, when we've spoken with a farmer who got basically left California because she couldn't follow the rules because they kept putting new regulations and rules on her, and she goes, I can't make any money doing this. And she was actually um making sure that she was growing food for her own series of restaurants. She had restaurants and she was making food for those. And they just go, I'm just not even, I can't do it. I actually moved to Texas like everybody else. But anyway, and I think of my cousin in Sweden running his farm and using the poop from the steers to, make sure he's got good crops and you know, everything. I mean, I need to find, in fact, I have a big garden. So I'm thinking, okay, I need to find somebody who's going to give me the chicken poop from their chickens in the backyard. I don't have those yet, but anyway.
Yeah.
So, but what are your thoughts? I mean, the whole Maha movement, how this is changing the farming industry.
Yeah, you're so right that some of these practices are all being made new again, which is a good thing. And then
Mhm.
some of them are totally new ideas. And there are a lot of family farms that like planting cover crops, for instance. So the farm that I grew up on is a farm that's kind of a mix of a traditional farm. We grow corn and soybeans and other things. We're also experimenting with new crops all the time. We once just milked cows, and now we sold that dairy herd, but we're raising dairy cows for other farms and we're raising beef and pasture raised chickens. So we're kind of in that place where we're going from that traditional farm to trying to transition into new things where it makes sense. And that's the thing that people need to understand. It's not just us, it's most farms across the country. We have nearly 2 million farms left. We've lost 70% of them. We have nearly 2 million farms left. 88% of them are small farms, 96% of them are family farms. And so these are farms that have been growing something that for one reason or another, the market doesn't work the way it's supposed to, or it maybe has them doing some stuff that they wish they didn't have to do and they need to transition to new crops and products. So the fact that people care about where their food comes from, and regenerative practices and all these things that are new are good because that creates new markets. We just have to make sure that as we're doing that, we don't do like what advocates of big government would do, where they like take and they force a mandate on someone. That's what you're talking about in California, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we've got to do it in a way that says, okay, these are small businesses that have very little money, and they got to take that extra money they have and they got to invest it in a new crop. Say, I'm going to try a couple acres in this year, see if I can make it on that, and if I can, I'm going to move away from this other stuff. They have very little money, and they got to be able to take those kind of bets and have them pay off. So we need to work with farms like the small businesses that they are to make the transition. And if we do, we can have a whole new generation of farming and food production in this country.
One of the stories you tell is about the real trauma that happens on the personal lives of people who are really up against it. When the government comes in and distorts the markets and really puts pressure on people and they can't make it, and the feelings that arise from that, having personal um, experience with how the market or how the government ruined a particular market, and one of my family members committed suicide, and how hard this is, and how your back is against the wall, and in front of you is an entire phalanx of government bots telling you what you can and cannot do, and acting as a picker of winners and losers so that you're on the losing side. I saw that happen in the car market, medical field. And this is just the last 15 years, all this stuff's happened. And it's caused a lot of angst, and it's caused a lot of agitation. And talk about your family story.
Thank you for asking about that issue, and I'm so sorry for your
Thank
loss.
you.
Without knowing the circumstances, I can tell you that I'm sure that um, members of my family probably related very much with that loved one of yours. In my family's case, you know, a farm is facing all of those economic problems, and you have parents who are trying to continue onward and worried that they're going to go until one day they just can't provide for their kids anymore, or they're going to turn around and sell the farm, which is like selling everything else, because the farm is not just your dad's job when you grow up like I did, but it's your home, it's your community, it's your heritage, right? So you're left with, okay, am I going to drive my family into the ground financially, or am I going to sell everything we've got, not just our house or change jobs, right? But like everything.
Mhm.
So that is a really, really difficult situation for someone to be in. And then you pile that on generation after generation. We tell the personal stories of my family through different generations. And you look back through our family history and it's like, geez, great grandpa escaped pre-war war in Europe to dig a living out of the dirt. Grandpa and grandma survived the depression. Mom and dad got through the farm crisis. Every generation asks themselves, well, they did that. Why can't I make it? And so people don't feel that they have worth if they can't make it. And my dad and I, we experienced this, and saw firsthand why farmer suicides are among the highest rate in the country of
Yeah.
any occupation. My dad, when I reference it, we sold our cows, we sold our milk cows, and we had other types of livestock, and we kept our land, and we were going to cash crop, and we were going to raise dairy cows for other herds, and we were going to sell beef. So we had hope, we had reason to carry on. But my dad was selling our milk cows after 100 years of our family milking cows. So when you do that every day, morning and night, and that's your purpose, and you suddenly sold that purpose, even if there is something else that feels good or you're hopeful about or your kids are hopeful about, you still question your self-worth. And I remember standing on the porch of a cabin that I have out back of the farmhouse with my dad, and I remember thinking, I wonder, this is the day after he sold the cows. I remember thinking, I wonder if he's thinking that because we had people, a farmer right down the road had taken his life. And I wondered that. And I didn't have the courage to ask him. But we knew from that farmer's example, which led to the creation of an organization called the Farmer Angel Network, that we had to just talk. So we talked and we tried to work through it. And I found out in the course of researching the book, talking to my dad, that he had been thinking about taking his life that very day when we were on that cabin porch. And somehow we were standing there right next to each other, but we were a world apart. Excuse me. We were a world apart.
Mm.
And the fact that my dad was thinking about that and I was thinking about that and we didn't know how to say it to each other just made us such big advocates for mental health. And that's why we told that story. I asked my dad, I said, boy, we're being awful honest in this book. We bared it all. I said, do we want to tell that? You know? And my dad said, we got to tell people because I want them to know that they're not alone. And I'm happy to say that my dad's doing good. I'm grateful for that. And the way he got out of it was thinking about his grandkids. I've got a little 1 year
Oh,
old. At the time, she wasn't born yet, but it was my sister's kids, and he was saying to himself, I got grandkids here. I got to teach them things, and he saw that there's worth to the farm or whatever happens to the farm.
mhm.
So it's that next generation that pulled him through, and that's really what's carried every farm family through. And we just have to be aware of these issues and talk about them because they can bring tragedy where you would never expect it.
I mean, it should be a clue that you have a farmer angel network. I mean, that there's a tell. I mean, when
Yeah,
you have an organization that caters to people who have suffered those losses, it's amazing. Especially in your case, you've got. I mean, you're in Wisconsin, right? Your people are in Wisconsin. Your farms in Wisconsin, and it's like, I have dairy cows. How do I not? How do I have to sell dairy cows? I
it's such a
mean,
personal
that's
relationship with their
crazy.
in particular. But whatever kind of animal it is, whatever kind of farming it is, you're close to the land, you're close to animals that you care about,
Yeah,
an intimate connection. And the other thing about it, and this is why I'm so glad you brought it up. Farm families are taught to keep their head down and get the work done, right?
sure. Yep,
And so, for anybody in any walk of life, mental health is a hard thing to talk about, and I think we have a mental health crisis in this country across the board.
totally. Absolutely.
In our case, the way that manifests itself is because you're taught to keep your head down and not complain. I'll give you an example. I grew up picking rock by hand. My little girl, by the time she hears about that, she's gonna think that was like Little House on the Prairie. Like my dad must have lived. No, it was the 1990s. But like we didn't have machinery
Wasn't
yet.
that long ago.
Wasn't that long ago. But we're picking rock and you're throwing them in a bucket, and then you're throwing the bucket up onto the wagon, and you're doing that at age 10. You're kind of taught to keep your head down and not complain. And there's good to that. There's
Yeah.
resilience, there's hard work, there's values, but you don't learn to talk about your feelings in that instance either. And that's why I think so many of our farm families, it's just one example of why farm families have a hard time sharing.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Well, what a story. Thank you so much for sharing it. And thank you so much for giving your expertise and my best to you and your family. And I just pray that everything goes very well for you. And the
Thank you.
book, you can get it on Amazon. Let me just make sure. I want to make sure I see the book title, Land Rich, Cash Poor. Sounds familiar. My Family's Hope, an Untold Story of the Disappearing American Farmer.
That's
Thank
right.
you so much, Brian Reisinger, for coming on the Adult in the Room podcast. Thank you.
Thank you for shedding light on these issues. People can find the book on Amazon, bookstores nationwide, and the paperback is just out. We're very excited about the new edition, and I appreciate anybody, honestly, who just spreads the word on these issues and gets us talking. So
Yep.
thank you.
There's a whole genre of cowboy, poets and stuff like that. Now you are a farmer poet, I think.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I like that. I
Yeah.
like one
I
of
I think I think there's something in there. Yeah. Thanks
Thank you.
again. Appreciate it very much.